Before microwave dinners and fast food drive-thrus became a norm, families across America were still cooking recipes that had fed people for thousands of years. These weren't just meals. They were connections to the land, to seasons, and to traditions that stretched back long before anyone wrote them down. Today, we're looking at 25 Native American recipes that were still common in kitchens during the 1970s, but have mostly vanished from our tables. Some of these might surprise you, because they're not what most people picture when they think of traditional Native foods. Let's get started. Smoked eel. Rivers and streams across North America once teemed with eels, providing reliable protein for tribes living near waterways. These snake-like fish could be caught using traditional traps made from woven baskets or spears wielded by skilled fishermen. Smoking the eels preserved them for months while concentrating their rich, oily flavor into something truly special. By the 70s, smoked eel had become rare even in native communities as water pollution and habitat destruction decimated eel populations, and fewer people maintained the traditional skills for catching and smoking them. Catching eels required understanding their habits and seasonal movements. These fish were most active at night and during rainy weather, when they moved through shallow water in search of food. Traditional eel traps took advantage of this behavior, funneling the fish into basket-like containers where they couldn't escape. Spearing eels required quick reflexes and intimate knowledge of where they liked to hide during daylight hours under rocks or in muddy banks. The smoking process transformed fresh eel into a completely different food. The cleaned eels got hung on wooden racks over slow-burning fires, often using specific woods like alder or oak that imparted particular flavors. The smoking took days, slowly dehydrating the fish while infusing them with smoke. The fires had to be tended carefully, kept at just the right temperature to smoke without cooking too fast. Too hot, and the eels would cook through without proper smoking. Too cool, and they wouldn't preserve properly. The finished product had a deep, rich flavor that was both fishy and smoky, with a texture that was firm yet tender. The skin became dark and slightly crispy, while the meat inside stayed moist and flavorful. Smoked eel provided essential omega-3 fatty acids and complete protein that kept people healthy throughout long winters. During the 70s, families lucky enough to have access to eels and the knowledge to smoke them properly considered them a delicacy worth the effort involved. Bear fat fry bread. Fry bread carries complicated feelings in native communities. While it represents survival and adaptability, it also reminds people of government commodities and the forced changes to traditional diets that came with reservation life. Bear fat fry bread connects to older traditions predating commodity foods, back when native hunters rendered fat from bears, elk, and buffalo to create cooking oil that could last for months without refrigeration. Bear fat has unique properties that make it perfect for frying. It has a high smoke point so it doesn't burn easily, and it adds a rich, nutty flavor to whatever gets cooked in it. During the 70s, hunters who were lucky enough to get a bear would render the fat by cutting it into small pieces and slowly heating it until the pure oil separated from the solid pieces. The rendered fat got stored in jars or traditional hide containers, staying fresh for months. The fry bread dough itself was simple. Just flour, salt, baking powder, and water mixed into a soft dough that you could easily work with your hands. Small pieces got stretched thin, usually about 6 inches across, then dropped into hot bear fat, where they puffed up into golden circles with crispy edges and soft, pillowy centers. Traditional fry bread was smaller and denser than the plate-sized versions you see at powwows today. The taste of bear fat fry bread is distinctive. The bread itself is simple and slightly chewy, but the bear fat add a wild, gamey flavor that's unmistakable. Some people loved it while others found it too strong. Families would eat fry bread with Wojapi, wild honey, or meat, using it to soak up gravies and sauces. It provided essential calories during long hunts or harsh weather when people needed dense, portable food that would keep them going. Hopi Piki bread. Piki bread represents one of the most technically challenging foods in Native American cuisine. Made by the Hopi people of northeastern Arizona, this paper-thin bread requires years of practice to master and holds deep ceremonial significance in Hopi culture. The bread is so thin it's almost transparent, yet it maintains enough structure to be rolled into tight cylinders that can be stored for months. During the 70s, Piki bread was still made regularly in Hopi villages, though fewer young women were learning the skill as modern life pulled them away from traditional practices. Making Piki bread started with blue cornmeal that had been ground to an almost powder-like consistency on stone metates. This grinding took considerable time and effort, creating meal fine enough to make the thin batter needed for Piki. The meal got mixed with water and a small amount of ash from four-winged saltbush plants, which served as a leavening agent and gave the bread its distinctive color and flavor. The batter had to be exactly the right consistency, thin enough to spread in an almost transparent layer, yet thick enough to hold together when cooked. The cooking process required a special smooth stone called a Piki stone that had been polished to mirror-like perfection over years of use. These stones were treasured family possessions, often passed down through generations. The stone got heated over fire until it reached the exact right temperature. Then the batter got spread across it using bare hands in one quick, smooth motion. Within seconds, the batter set into a thin sheet that could be peeled off and rolled while still warm. Master Piki bread makers could create sheets so thin that text could be read through them, yet strong enough to maintain their shape for months. The finished Piki had a delicate, crispy texture and subtle corn flavor enhanced by the alkaline taste from the saltbush ash. Making Piki was time-consuming work that required complete focus and years of practice to perfect, which is why it was becoming rare even in the 70s. Pemmican sounds exotic, but people in the northern plains were still making the survival food well into the 70s, especially in rural areas where hunting remained a way of life rather than a hobby. The name comes from the Cree word Pemmican, and what it describes is basically the world's first energy bar, created centuries before anyone thought to patent the idea. The process of making pemmican started with whatever game meat was available. Deer, elk, or moose worked fine, though buffalo made the best pemmican according to people who remember the old ways. The meat had to be extremely lean because fat would go rancid. Hunters would trim away every bit of fat, slice the meat into thin strips, then dry over low fires or in the sun until it became completely brittle. Once the meat dried out completely, it got pounded into powder using whatever tools were handy. Traditional families used smooth river stones, but by the 70s, some people had discovered that a food processor could do the same job in a fraction of the time. The meat powder would then get mixed with rendered fat, usually bear fat or beef tallow, in about a 1-to-1 ratio. Many recipes also included dried berries, typically cranberries or chokecherries, which added flavor and important vitamins. The mixture got formed into bars or balls that could last for years without refrigeration. A piece of pemmican the size of your fist could keep someone going through a full day of hard physical work. Hunters still carried it into the backcountry during the 70s because it was lighter and more reliable than any store-bought trail food. The taste was intense and took some getting used to. Rich, slightly gamey, with bursts of tart berry flavor cutting through the fat. But people who grew up eating it often craved that specific combination of flavors their whole lives. Buffalo roast with juniper berries. Buffalo roast with juniper berries represents plains cooking at its finest, combining grass-fed buffalo meat with wild seasonings that grow across the western United States. By the 70s, most native families no longer had regular access to buffalo meat because the herds had been decimated in the previous century. But some communities were beginning to establish buffalo ranches, and the lucky families who would get buffalo meat treated it like the delicacy it was. Preparing this dish started with selecting a good roast from the shoulder or hindquarter. Buffalo meat is leaner than beef and can become tough if cooked incorrectly. The meat got rubbed with crushed juniper berries, which aren't actually berries at all, but the female cones of juniper trees. They taste like a combination of gin and pine needles with a slightly bitter finish that cuts through the richness of the meat. The seasoned roast traditionally got cooked slowly over low coals or in earth ovens lined with hot stones. The long, slow cooking process, sometimes taking 6 or 8 hours, broke down the tough fibers in buffalo meat and made it tender enough to pull apart with your fingers. The juniper berries infuse the meat with a unique flavor that's completely different from any modern seasoning you can buy in stores. What people don't often realize is that this wasn't just food. Juniper berries have medicinal properties, helping with digestion and acting as natural antiseptics. The combination of rich buffalo meat and aromatic juniper made a meal that satisfied hunger while also supporting overall health. During the 70s, buffalo roast with juniper berries appeared at special gatherings and ceremonies, marking occasions important enough to warrant using precious buffalo meat. Cholla buds with agave syrup. The Sonoran Desert might look barren to outsiders, but desert tribes like the Tohono knew it as a vast grocery store filled with nutritious foods, if you knew where to look and when to harvest. Cholla buds, the flower buds of prickly pear cactus, provided important nutrition during late spring when other food sources ran low. These spiny buds required careful harvesting and preparation, but they offered protein, calcium, and complex carbohydrates that sustained desert communities through the hottest, driest months. During the 70s, Cholla bud harvesting remained an important activity in Tohono communities, though younger people were beginning to lose interest in these traditional foods. Harvesting Cholla buds took skill and the right tools. Using long wooden tongs, collectors would knock the buds from tall cactus plants before the flowers opened. The buds were covered in sharp spines that had to be removed by rolling them in sand or burning them off over fires. Both methods worked, though burning was faster and gave the buds a slightly smoky flavor that many people preferred. Once cleaned, the buds got roasted in earth ovens lined with hot stones, cooking for hours until they became tender and developed a sweet, complex flavor. Agave syrup made from the hearts of century plants provided the perfect complement to roasted Cholla buds. Harvesting and processing agave was a major undertaking. The agave hearts, which could weigh 50 pounds or more, had to be dug up, trimmed, and then roasted in underground pit ovens for several days. This long, slow cooking broke down complex carbohydrates into simple sugars that tasted like dark honey with a hint of caramel. When Cholla buds were served with agave syrup, the combination created a dessert that was completely natural yet satisfying enough to end any meal. The slightly smoky, vegetable-like flavor of the Cholla buds paired perfectly with the deep sweetness of the agave syrup. This pairing showed how desert peoples found sweetness and sustenance in one of North America's harshest environments, using knowledge passed down through countless generations. Prickly pear cactus jam. Prickly pear cacti produce beautiful fruits called tunas that range in color from deep red to bright yellow. These fruits provided essential vitamins and natural sugars for southwestern tribes who developed techniques for harvesting and processing them despite their protective covering of tiny spines called glochids. Prickly pear jam concentrated the fruit's nutrition while preserving it for months without refrigeration. During the 70s, making prickly pear jam remained a late summer tradition in many native households across the Southwest. Harvesting prickly pear fruits required thick gloves and careful handling. The fruits got twisted off the cactus pads when they were fully ripe, indicated by their deep color and slight softness. The glochids had to be removed before the fruits could be processed. Some families rolled the fruits in sand and knock off the spines. Others scraped them with sticks, and some singed them off over open flames. Each method had its advocates, though burning was fastest if you were processing large quantities. Once cleaned, the fruits revealed sweet, seedy flesh that ranged from white to deep magenta, depending on the variety. Making jam involved crushing the fruits and cooking them slowly until the liquid reduced and thickened. Traditional methods relied on the fruit's natural pectin for thickening, though some tribes added ground chia seeds or other natural thickeners to speed up the process. The cooking took hours, with constant stirring to prevent scorching. The finished jam had an intense sweet flavor with floral notes that's unlike any other fruit. The color was spectacular, deep magenta or ruby red that looked almost artificial in its brightness. This jam provided concentrated nutrition during winter months when fresh fruit wasn't available, and it served as a special treat for ceremonies and gatherings. By the 70s, some families had started selling prickly pear jam at markets and fairs, introducing non-native people to this traditional food. Cattail pollen cakes. Cattails grow in wetlands across North America, providing multiple food sources from their roots to their shoots to their pollen. The golden pollen that covers cattail flower spikes in early summer can be collected and used to make cakes with a unique flavor and bright yellow color. This pollen is incredibly nutritious, containing protein, vitamins, and minerals that made it a valuable addition to traditional diets. During the 70s, cattail pollen cakes were still made by families who lived near wetlands and maintained knowledge of this traditional food, though it was becoming increasingly rare. Collecting cattail pollen required timing and the right technique. The pollen was ready when the flower spikes turned bright yellow and released clouds of golden dust when shaken. This window of opportunity lasted only a week or two in early summer, usually June. Collectors would bend the cattail heads into baskets or bags, then shake them vigorously to release the pollen. A good day of collecting in a healthy cattail marsh could yield several pounds of pollen, though it took visiting many cattail stands to gather that much. Cattail pollen cakes combine the collected pollen with ground cornmeal or other flours along with water and sometimes eggs or fat to bind everything together. The mixture got formed into small cakes about the size of hockey pucks and cooked on hot stones or in cast iron skillets by the 70s. The finished cakes had a bright yellow color that was almost startling in its intensity and a slightly nutty, floral flavor that was unlike anything else. These cakes provided concentrated nutrition and served as special treats during gatherings and ceremonies. The golden color made them festive and appropriate for celebrations. By the 70s, fewer people were making cattail pollen cakes because the knowledge of when and how to collect the pollen was fading, and wetlands where cattails grew were being drained or polluted, making traditional gathering areas unusable. Hominy Stew. Hominy represents one of humanity's greatest food innovations, though most people have no idea of its importance. The process of treating corn with alkaline solutions to create hominy makes the grain more nutritious and easier to digest, preventing diseases like pellagra that plagued populations who ate untreated corn. Native American tribes developed this technique independently thousands of years ago, and by the 70s, hominy stew remained a staple dish in many households, even as the tradition of making hominy from scratch began to fade. Creating hominy from dried field corn required wood ash from specific trees like hickory or oak. The ash got mixed with water to create lye, which was then heated with corn kernels until the tough outer hulls loosened and could be rubbed off. What remained were plump white kernels with a distinctive chewy texture and nutty flavor, completely different from regular corn. By the 70s, many people had switched to canned hominy from the grocery store, but some families still made their own, insisting that homemade hominy tasted better and had better texture. Hominy stew combined these processed corn kernels with meat, usually venison or rabbit, and whatever vegetables were in season or stored from the previous harvest. Wild onions, Jerusalem artichokes, and dried berries often found their way into the pot. The stew cooked slowly over low heat, sometimes for an entire day, allowing the flavors to develop and the hominy to become tender while remaining slightly chewy. The finished stew had a thick, almost grainy consistency from the hominy breaking down slightly during the long cooking process. It was filling in a way that regular corn could never be, probably because the nixtamalization process changed the corn structure and made its nutrients more available. Families ate hominy stew throughout the winter months when fresh food was scarce, relying on it to provide complete nutrition that kept everyone healthy until spring arrived. Wild rice and cranberry pilaf. Wild rice isn't actually rice at all. It's a grass seed that grows in shallow lakes of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and southern Canada. The Ojibwe people call it manumin, which translates to good berry, and they've harvested it using traditional methods for over 1,000 years. During the 70s, wild rice was still harvested primarily by native families, using wooden canoes and carved poles, though commercial operations were beginning to change the market. Harvesting wild rice requires specific knowledge about timing and technique. Families would paddle wooden canoes into rice beds during late August or early September, using long poles to push the canoe slowly through the shallow water. One person guided the canoe while another used wooden sticks called knockers to bend the rice stalks over the canoe and knock the ripe seeds into the boat. Only the ripe seeds would fall, leaving the rest to mature for later harvest or to reseed the lake naturally. The harvested rice had to be processed before it could be eaten. First it got spread out to dry, then parched over fires to loosen the hulls. The parched rice was then winnowed, usually by pouring it from one basket to another in the wind, separating the edible grains from the chaff. This processing created the dark, nutty grains that we recognize as wild rice. Cooking wild rice in cranberry pilaf meant simmering the rice slowly until the grains split open and became tender, which took about 45 minutes. Then you'd mix in dried cranberries, wild onions, and sometimes nuts like hazelnuts or walnuts. The combination provided complete nutrition with protein, complex carbohydrates, antioxidants, and healthy fats all in one dish. During the 70s, this pilaf showed up at holiday meals and celebrations, though it was also eaten regularly by families who lived near wild rice lakes and could harvest their own supply each fall. Pine nut soup. Pine nuts, also called piñon nuts, grow on specific pine trees found across the American Southwest. These protein-rich nuts mature only every few years, making good piñon years called for celebration among tribes like the Paiute, Shoshone, and Navajo. Pine nut soup represented the ultimate comfort food during the 70s in communities that still gathered wild foods, combining the rich, buttery nuts with warming broth to create a dish that satisfied both hunger and the soul. Harvesting pine nuts required timing and patience. The cones had to be gathered just as they began to open, but before the nuts fell out naturally. Families would travel to traditional gathering areas, often camping for weeks while collecting enough nuts to last through winter. The gathering trips became important social occasions where families reconnected and shared news while working side by side. The cones got roasted over fires to open them fully. Then the nuts were extracted by hand, a time-consuming process that brought families together in shared work. Pine nut soup started with grinding the nuts into meal using mortars and pestles. The meal then got cooked with water or broth until it formed a creamy consistency similar to cream of wheat, but richer and more flavorful. Some versions included wild vegetables or small pieces of meat, while others relied purely on the nuts for nutrition and flavor. The finished soup had a rich, nutty taste and creamy texture that was deeply satisfying. Pine nuts are one of the few plant foods that provide complete protein, making the soup an excellent source of nutrition for people following traditional diets. The soup was particularly important during winter, when fresh food was scarce. By the 70s, pine nut soup had become less common because fewer families were making the yearly pilgrimage to gathering areas. The time and effort required to harvest and process pine nuts seemed impractical to younger generations who could buy food at stores. Nettle soup. Stinging nettles grow wild across North America, and while most people consider them weeds to be avoided because of their painful sting, Native American tribes recognize them as powerful food and medicine. Young nettle leaves harvested before the plant's flower provide more protein than spinach, along with high levels of iron, calcium, and vitamins A and C. Nettle soup served as an important spring tonic during the 70s in communities where people still forage for wild foods, helping people recover from winter's limited diet. Harvesting nettles required thick gloves and careful handling to avoid the stinging hairs that give the plant its name. The best leaves came from young plants in early spring, usually April or May, when they were tender and hadn't developed their full stinging power. Older plants became tough and bitter, less suitable for eating. Once cooked, the stinging properties disappeared completely, leaving behind nutritious greens with a flavor similar to spinach but with more depth and complexity. Traditional nettle soup started with a base of water or bone broth, to which the clean nettle leaves were added along with wild onions, prairie turnips, or other available vegetables. Some families added chunks of meat for extra protein, while others kept the soup purely plant-based. The soup had a beautiful green color and earthy flavor that spoke to the connection between indigenous people and the land that sustained them. By the 70s, nettle soup had become somewhat rare even in native communities because fewer people were foraging regularly for wild foods. The knowledge of where nettles grew and when to harvest them was starting to fade as younger generations moved to cities or took jobs that didn't allow time for foraging. But some families held on to tradition, making nettle soup every spring as a way to mark the season's change and maintain connections to their ancestors' knowledge. Cedar tea. Cedar tea doesn't actually come from cedar trees. It's made from various evergreen trees, including white pine, hemlock, and juniper that Native Americans called cedar because of their similar aromatic properties. This tea provided essential vitamin C during winter months when fresh fruits and vegetables weren't available, preventing scurvy and other nutritional diseases that affected many early European explorers who didn't know about this simple remedy. During the 70s, cedar tea remained common in northern native communities where pine trees grew abundantly. Different tribes used different trees for their cedar tea, but the preparation method stayed similar across cultures. Fresh or dried needles got steeped in hot water for several minutes, creating a tea with a piney, slightly bitter flavor that took some getting used to. The tea contained not only vitamin C, but also antimicrobial compounds that help fight infections and respiratory problems common during cold weather. The taste is distinctive and not for everyone. Strong, resinous, and almost medicinal. But people who grew up drinking cedar tea often came to crave its unique flavor, especially during winter months when colds and flu made the rounds. Many families kept jars of dried pine needles in their pantries, ready to make tea whenever someone felt under the weather. Drinking cedar tea connected people to the forest in a direct, intimate way. Each sip carried the essence of ancient trees that had weathered countless seasons. Many Native Americans considered cedar tea sacred, using it in ceremonies and healing rituals as well as for daily nutrition. The tea varied in strength and flavor depending on which tree species was used and what time of year the needles were harvested, with spring growth offering the mildest flavor. By the 70s, you could sometimes find cedar tea bags in health food stores, though most Native families prefer to make their own from fresh-gathered needles. Staghorn Sumac Lemonade. Staghorn sumac grows wild across much of North America, producing clusters of fuzzy red berries that look dangerous but actually make a refreshing drink that tastes remarkably like lemonade. During the 70s, Native families who knew about sumac berries would gather them in late summer and early fall, making batches of sumac lemonade for hot days when store-bought drinks seemed too expensive or too artificial. Unlike many wild foods, sumac berries could be used without any special preparation beyond identifying the right species. Making sumac lemonade required identifying the correct type of sumac. Staghorn sumac has fuzzy red berry clusters that grow upright at the ends of branches. Poison sumac, which should be avoided completely, has white berries and grows in swampy areas. Once you had the right berries, preparation was simple. The clusters got soaked in cold water for several hours, then strained through cloth or fine basketry to remove the seeds and fuzzy coating. The resulting liquid had a beautiful pink color and tangy flavor that was refreshed without being overpowering. The taste is tart and slightly fruity, genuinely reminiscent of lemonade, even though sumac has nothing to do with lemons. The citric acid in the berries creates that tartness, along with antioxidants and vitamin C, that make the drink nutritious as well as delicious. Some families added a bit of honey or sugar to balance the tartness, though traditional recipes relied on the natural flavor of the berries. During the 70s, sumac lemonade showed up at gatherings and ceremonies where its festive color and unique flavor marked special occasions. The berries could be dried and stored for winter use, providing a taste of summer during the coldest months when fresh flavors became precious memories. Kids who grew up drinking sumac lemonade often looked forward to late summer when the berries ripened, sometimes going out with parents or grandparents to gather them and help make the year's supply. Three Sisters Stew. Every kid who went to elementary school probably heard about the Three Sisters at some point. Corn, beans, and squash grown together in the same field, each one helping the other survive. What they probably didn't learn is that this agricultural system produced one of the most nutritionally complete meals possible using only plants. Three Sister Stew was still common in Native households during the 70s, though by then it had often picked up additions like tomatoes or peppers that weren't part of the original recipe. Making authentic Three Sister Stew meant starting with dried beans, usually kidney beans or pinto beans, and cooking them low and slow until they became tender. This took hours, not the quick 30 minutes you'd get with canned beans. While the beans cooked, you'd prepare the corn. Fresh sweet corn worked great in summer, but most additional recipes used dried corn that had to be soaked overnight before cooking. The squash went in last because it cooked faster than everything else. Winter squash varieties like butternut or acorn squash were traditional choices, though by the 70s some cooks were using zucchini or yellow summer squash instead. The magic of this stew lies in how the three ingredients complement each other nutritionally. Corn and beans together provide complete protein with all the amino acids humans need. The squash adds vitamin A, vitamin C, and complex carbohydrates that give you steady energy rather than blood sugar spikes. People could live on variations of the stew for months at a time and maintain excellent health, which is exactly what many communities did during harsh winters. Some families made it with wild game like venison or rabbit, turning it into a heartier meal. Others kept it completely vegetarian, which was more common than most people realize. Native American communities had sophisticated plant-based diets long before anyone invented the word vegan. By the 70s, Three Sisters stew had become comfort food for people who wanted to maintain connections to their heritage while adapting to modern life. Bison bone broth. Long before bone broth became trendy in expensive health food stores, Native American communities were simmering bison bones for days to extract every bit of nutrition from these animals. Bison bone broth was practical survival food during harsh winters when fresh meat became scarce, but was also deeply nourishing in ways that modern nutritionists are only beginning to understand. During the 70s, some families still made traditional bone broth, though it required time and patience that fewer people had as work schedules became more demanding. Making authentic bison bone broth meant starting with large leg bones and knuckle bones that got cracked open to expose the marrow. Traditionally, these bones went into hide-lined pits with hot stones and water, with fresh hot stones added regularly to maintain a gentle simmer. The cooking process took anywhere from 24 to 48 hours, extracting collagen, minerals, and marrow from the bones until they became soft and crumbly. By the 70s, most people who still made bone broth had adapted the process for modern stoves. The bones would simmer in large pots for a full day or longer, with water added as needed to keep everything covered. Some families added wild vegetables like prairie turnips or lamb's quarters for extra nutrition and flavor. The finished broth developed a rich golden color and gelatin-like consistency when it cooled, which showed that the collagen had been properly extracted. The taste is hard to describe if you've never tried it. Rich and mineral-heavy with an almost meaty flavor, even though it's just liquid. People who grew up eating traditional foods craved bone broth when they were sick or run down because something in their bodies recognized how nourishing it was. Modern research has confirmed that bone broth provides nutrients including glycine, proline, and minerals that support gut health, joint function, and strong bones. The people making it in the 70s didn't need scientific studies to tell them it was good for them. They could feel the difference. Corn husk-wrapped tamales. Southwestern tribes were making tamales centuries before Spanish colonizers arrived in the Americas, and by the 70s these corn husk-wrap packages remained common in Pueblo communities and throughout the Southwest. The tamales made by native cooks differ from Mexican tamales in subtle ways, using different seasonings and cooking methods that reflected thousands of years of separate culinary development. Traditional tamale making started with preparing masa from dried corn kernels. The corn had to be treated with ash water or lime water to remove the hulls, a process called nixtamalization that makes corn easier to digest and increases its nutritional value by freeing up niacin and adding calcium. The treated corn got ground into smooth dough on stone metates, which required significant arm strength and time. By the 70s, some families had started using hand-crank grinders or even electric grinders, though purists insisted the stone-ground masa tasted better. The masa got spread on softened corn husks, then filled with various ingredients depending on what was available and what the occasion called for. Rabbit, deer, or turkey meat mixed with wild chilies and herbs made popular fillings. Some families made vegetarian tamales using beans mashed with sunflower seeds, creating protein-rich options that could be eaten during religious fasting periods. The filled husks got tied shut with strips of corn husk, then steamed for hours until the masa became firm and the flavors melded together. Opening a hot tamale released an aroma that connected people directly to centuries of tradition. The corn husk imparted a subtle vegetable flavor to the masa while keeping it moist during cooking. During the 70s, tamale making was often a communal activity, with multiple generations working together to produce dozens or even hundreds of tamales for celebrations, ceremonies, or to store for later use. Blue corn mush. Blue corn holds sacred significance for Hopi and Navajo communities, and during the 70s it was still a daily staple in many households, though it's become increasingly rare today. This ancient corn variety produces kernels in deep purple-blue colors packed with antioxidants that regular yellow corn doesn't have in the same concentrations. Blue corn mush served as breakfast food, providing steady energy for hard physical work in desert conditions where the heat could exhaust you quickly. Making blue corn mush the traditional way meant grinding dry blue corn kernels into fine meal using a metate, which is a large flat grinding stone. This wasn't something you could rush through. The grinding process took considerable effort, sometimes an hour or more depending on how much mush you wanted to make. Some families own metates that have been passed down for generations, their volcanic stone surfaces worn smooth and seasoned by decades of use. The ground cornmeal got cooked slowly with water, stirring constantly to prevent lumps from forming. As it cooked, the mush developed a beautiful lavender color and rich, nutty flavor that's completely different from regular cornmeal. The consistency you were aiming for was somewhere between oatmeal and polenta, thick enough to hold its shape on a spoon, but still creamy and smooth. Many families ate blue corn mush every morning, often adding wild honey or dried berries for sweetness. The high protein content and complex carbohydrates provided sustained energy that kept people satisfied for hours without the crash you get from sugary cereals. Kids growing up eating blue corn mush in the 70s often crave it as adults, even after moving to cities where blue corn became hard to find. The taste connected them home in a way that regular corn products never could. Acorn bread. Acorns cover the ground every fall across most of North America, and for thousands of years, people knew how to turn these bitter nuts into nutritious bread. By the 70s, acorn bread had become rare, except in areas where older family members still remember the traditional preparation methods. The process takes time and knowledge that didn't get passed down as consistently as some other recipes. The first challenge with acorns is that they contain tannins, the same compounds that make strong tea taste bitter. Raw acorns are inedible because these tannins will make you sick. Traditional preparation involved cracking the acorns, grinding them into meal using stones or mortars, then leaching out the tannins with water. Some families put the acorn meal in loosely woven baskets and poured water through it repeatedly until the bitter taste disappeared. Others buried bags of acorn meal in streams, letting running water do the work over several days. Once the tannins were removed, the acorn meal became sweet and nutty tasting. It got mixed with just enough water to form dough, then shaped into flat cakes and cooked on hot stones or griddles. The finished bread had a dense, heavy texture completely different from wheat bread. It didn't rise at all, so you ended up with something closer to a thick cracker than what most Americans think of as bread. The flavor is hard to describe if you've never tried it. Earthy and rich with subtle sweetness that comes from the acorns themselves rather than added sugar. During the 70s, a few families in California and the Pacific Northwest still made acorn bread regularly, but required access to oak trees and the knowledge of which varieties produce the best acorns. Some oaks make better acorns than others, and that information usually stayed within families rather than getting written down in cookbooks. Chokecherry patties. Chokecherries grow wild across much of North America, producing small, dark fruits that are incredibly astringent when eaten fresh, but become sweet and flavorful when properly processed. Plains tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne relied heavily on chokecherries, which they processed into patties that could be stored for years without spoiling. These fruit leather-like patties provided concentrated nutrition and natural sweetness during the hardest times. During the 70s, chokecherry patties remained common in some communities, though the tradition was beginning to fade as younger people found the process too time-consuming. Processing chokecherries required patience and knowledge passed down through generations. The berries got mashed, pits and all, using wooden mortars or smooth stones. The mashed berries got spread on hides, woven mats, or by the 70s, sometimes on clean canvas, then left to dry in the sun. The drying process took several days, during which the fruit formed a leather-like sheet that could be rolled up and stored. The pits added a subtle almond flavor to the finished product, while providing additional nutrients. Some people worry about the pits, but traditional processing methods made them safe to eat. Traditional chokecherry patties were much more concentrated than modern fruit leather. They were dense, chewy, and intensely flavored, designed to provide maximum nutrition in the smallest possible package. A piece the size of your palm could satisfy hunger and provide energy for hours of hard work. Many tribes considered chokecherry patties essential travel food, carrying them on long journeys where fresh food wasn't available. The taste is hard to describe. Intensely fruity with that distinctive chokecherry flavor that's both sweet and slightly astringent, with a hint of almond from the ground pits. During the 70s, families who still made chokecherry patties often gave them as gifts, sharing this traditional food with relatives and friends who might not have access to chokecherries or the knowledge to process them. Wojapi. The first recipe on our list is Wojapi. And if you grew up anywhere near Lakota communities in the Dakotas during the 70s, you probably remember this berry sauce showing up at every potluck and family gathering. The word means pudding in Lakota, though that doesn't really capture what it is. Think of it more like a thick berry compote that people spoon over everything from fried bread to meat dishes. Making Wojapi wasn't complicated, but required patience that seems almost impossible by today's standards. Women would gather whatever berries were available. Choke cherries were the traditional choice, but by the 70s, people were also using blueberries, strawberries, or even store-bought berries when wild ones weren't available. The berries got crushed by hand, mixed with just enough water to keep them from burning, then cooked down slowly until they released their natural sugars and thickened into a sauce. The real art was in knowing when to stop cooking. Too little time and the sauce stayed thin and watery. Too much time, and you'd end up with something closer to jam. The best Wojapi had a consistency that would coat the back of a spoon, but still pour smoothly. Some families added a touch of honey or maple syrup, though purists insisted the fruit should provide all the sweetness needed. What made Wojapi special in the 70s was how it bridged old and new ways of eating. Traditional families served it with buffalo meat or venison at ceremonial meals. But plenty of people also discovered it tasted pretty good on ice cream or mixed into yogurt. Kids who might turn their noses up at Indian food would happily eat Wojapi on pancakes without realizing they were participating in a tradition hundreds of years old. Tanka Bars. Tanka Bars represent what happened when someone took the ancient concept of pemmican and figured out how to make it appeal to modern consumers. These didn't exist in the 70s, but they're worth mentioning because they show how traditional foods can evolve. Mark Tilson, a Lakota entrepreneur, started making these bars in the early 2000s using the same basic principles his ancestors had used for pemmican. The bars combine buffalo meat with cranberries and natural seasonings, creating something that tastes surprisingly good to people who've never tried traditional native foods. What makes them different from regular jerky or protein bars is the inclusion of that rendered fat, which gives them staying power. You eat one Tanka bar, and you're actually satisfied for hours, not hungry again in 30 minutes like you would be with most snack foods. The business model behind Tanka Bars matters as much as the recipe. The buffalo meat comes from native-owned ranches, and profits support tribal economic development programs. When you buy a Tanka Bar, you're participating in an economy that helps native communities maintain connections to their traditional food sources while building modern, sustainable businesses. It's a model that didn't exist in the 70s, but shows where things could have gone if people had valued these traditional foods more highly back then. These 22 recipes represent just a fraction of the traditional foods that were still common in Native American kitchens during the 70s, but have mostly disappeared from our tables today. Each one tells a story about adaptation, survival, and deep connections to the land. Some of these foods are making comebacks as younger generations rediscover their heritage and recognize the nutritional value of traditional diets. Others may be lost forever if the knowledge isn't passed on soon. What traditional foods from your family or community do you remember that aren't common anymore? Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you enjoyed this look at forgotten recipes, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future videos exploring food history and traditional cooking.